So you're from Chile?
I am.
I always used to call it Chile, but now I'm told it's Chile.
No, it's not actually.
Oh, is that right?
It is Chile. Yeah, so I was a very young person when the coup d'etat happened in Chile, and that it really transformed the life not only of my personal life, but the life of the country. And if I can just ask you to imagine being about 5 or 6 years old, and you're out there, with being carefree and playing, and then all of a sudden you hear gunshots, and then machine guns, and then more gunshots, and then you really can't make sense of this except that it's scary. And the next minute you get your parents to grab you, and then a few people in our neighbourhood got together in one of the homes of one of my neighbours, and then our parents covered this room with mattresses that they had, so they were obviously trying to create an environment to protect us from what we could hear. There was a lot of gunshots. That is really vivid in my memory, of course, because it was quite a traumatic experience. And then that changed the life of many people. So at that time, people were murdered, they were apprehended, and then many people were disappeared. So there's still people in Chile that are looking for the people that are still disappeared. So then, I grew, my childhood really, in a way, was kind of marked by that occasion. But then what happened then, things seemed to be going to normality, because the military regime took hold of everything. The media was absolutely repressed. There was only, military news. There was no free press. There was no so in a way, the country learned how to internalize this oppression, and this is probably one of the worst things that could happen. And it was only until much later that I realized what had happened. So I grew up, like you just accept these things. You accept the military presence on the street. You accept the forever ongoing military cars and the police presence, and you accept the curfew. So as a teenager, I didn't do what you did, drugs and rock and roll, because we couldn't go out, really. There was a curfew every night and on weekends as well. So, but you accept that that's the way it is. So anyway, so it wasn't until I got to university that I really kind of began to realize what had been happening in my country. And because of this internalized oppression that I referred to before, my mum used to say, "You never talk about politics. Never, never talk about politics." So we didn't. And, yep, go on.
Oh, it just fascinates me that we talk about leadership, and to go to that extreme that you think the only way you can show leadership is through fear and intimidation to suppress a population. Have you got any understanding of how it can get to that state where they feel that's the only way they can govern a country?
It's complex, because the political situation in Latin America was very tied with political neoliberal politics within the United States. So actually the United States had a very strong say and actively participated in the number of coups d'etat that happens in Latin America, and they were very involved in instructing the military in all Latin America. So it is complex, and I have to say that Chile became if anyone here interested in economics, became the birthplace of the neoliberal economics. So they used Chile as a case study for neoliberal economy, and they were the famous, now known as the Chicago Boys. So a lot of Chileans were to the United States that trained in how to, if you like, implement a neoliberal economic policy, which is the extreme of capitalism, which basically, where most of the resources are operated by very few, and the rest of the population is quite poor, really.
So it was really seen as a way to experiment, and we'll just do it in someone else's backyard.
That's right. So, sorry, going back to your question about, the leadership. So basically, the United States enabled the dictatorship to be put in place, and then they were able to really utilize the economic policies, and they got a lot of advantages in that economic modeling. It wasn't just that, obviously. They were quite involved with with very right-wing and wealthy Chileans who obviously took part on this. And perhaps I should have explained that the coup happened because Chile had the first ever elected socialist president in Latin America and in the world at that time. So there was an enormous fear in the United States and other places that because the people know about Cuba, everyone knows. If you don't know anything about Cuba, you would have heard that, Cuba for a long time, communist Cuba or whatever, I don't know what you heard, but everyone has heard about Cuba. Now, Cuba had a few years before that, there was a revolution in Cuba, so the fact that there was a socialist regime in Chile, there was a strong fear that the whole continent was going to uprise and the whole continent was going to become socialist.
That domino effect.
That's right. So consequently, they couldn't allow Chile to be socialist country. Therefore, there was a number of things that occurred to implement and to manufacture a situation where a coup was what eventuated.
So we talked when we were setting this program up about decisions by humans either come out of love or fear.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever is fear can't be love, and whatever is love can't be fear. So you see it writ large on that international stage that fear drove those decisions, this fear of a different style of leadership which they couldn't understand.
Yeah, I suppose it's greed as well. I mean, it's probably I don't know, maybe on an individual level perhaps it's fear, but when you're talking about a structure of systemic disadvantaging people, then it's quite complex really. It's not an easy one way or another. But the point is there was a regime that oppressed people and murdered people, and basically the whole country was affected by this. By this situation, and for a long time, 17 years, the dictatorship happened for 17 years.
So, at what age were you when you left Chile then?
I was very young, 20, just 21.
So it was fleeing, or you left because you felt it? So under what circumstances did you leave?
Well, I came under what it was to be called a special humanitarian program, and that program was for people who had either political or religious persecution. And I have to say that they treated me very well. The government, Australian government, supported me, unlike what they're doing now. When, in Manus Island and in Papua New Guinea, the people that are there are known to be refugees, but 80% of the people that are in those, offshore processing are being found to be genuine refugees, and we're still not letting them in this country. I think that says a lot about how disengaged we are with that, with human suffering. And anyway, so I came as a refugee, yes.
Right.
When the word refugee perhaps wasn't so controversial. Anyhow, so I had to leave. I felt that I couldn't continue to be there, and that was because I got quite involved in politics. And that my involvement in politics wasn't as a result of some sort of intellectual decision, I'm going to become politically engaged. I felt I had no choice, and I also felt that as a young woman growing up in that place, that I just really desired a different way of living, a different way of organising. I felt that we had to say enough is enough. And perhaps I just tell you these two little short stories just to give you a sense of what that was like. So I was still living there. There was a national day of action. So if you like, all the unified people opposing to this dictator said we have to do something at a national level. So there was this, one day, and I was on the street like many other people, and so were these two young people. One, he was 19 and she was 18. And he had a camera, photographic camera. He was trying to document what was happening. They were picked up by the military because he had a camera, and he was shot. And they both were set alight, poured with petrol, and set alight. He died 4 days later, and she survived. Her body, 65% of her body was burnt. She became an ambassador for what was happening in Chile. She also came here when I just first arrived, and I got to meet her here. And that was horrific. And not only that, then more or less at the same time, there were 3 left-wing leaders who were involved in unions, and they were taken, their throats were cut, and the bodies were abandoned. So after that, there was such the level of terror, in state-driven terror, is so big that then it trying to paralyze the population. But then there was no way of paralyzing the population. I mean, there was an internal pressure. It was like a pressure cooker. And then by then the international community was saying enough is enough. So there were, loud voices that became quite, from Europe and the United States by then. But when I referred before about the involvement of the United States, there's been recently declassified information under the Clinton government that really articulated the involvement of the USA in the coup in Chile. So I'm not making that up. But I know for some people perhaps this is quite, oh my God, really? I don't know, in this audience it may not, but anyway.
So leadership, so we've heard about lots of different styles of leadership, and your leadership is really being forged out of fear and sheer trauma. And how do you find being able to be a leader when you are faced with you obviously had to lead, but there was a time when you were still in Chile when you had to speak, but you knew that you were putting your life in peril. What kept you going to do that?
You don't think about it. That's probably why. I think the whole concept of leadership is quite interesting. I think people a lot of the time you operate from your values, and that's probably has been the way I've operated. It's not necessarily a rational decision unless you are in a position of leadership, which subsequently I was in a sort of CEO position. Then you have a position of leadership and you're accountable to others. But in that situation, no, I think it was just operating from much more an intuitive sense of what is right and what's wrong. What do I want this place to be? Do I want to stand for oppression? Do I want to stand for freedom? And yes, so it wasn't an articulation of I'm going to lead. I was a kid really, very young.
And one of our beautiful quotes up there is, of course, terrible things happen when good people do nothing. So you really felt at that point you had a moral obligation to just keep doing what you felt was right.
That's right. And I mean, my peers, most the young people were driving a lot of that resistance and fighting, and on the streets, throwing rocks at the police. I mean, that being on the streets was really important. Having a very physical presence, people then knew that something was happening, and then it encouraged other people to do stuff. And I think young people are less conservative because they are there. There is a different time in your life. I probably would have been more conservative if I had kids or I had responsibility, financial responsibility. I wasn't answerable to anybody except my mother, I guess. But yeah.
So when you come to Australia, so complete change. Firstly, what was that like coming to a country where that veil of darkness and oppression was gone? What was that moment like when you realised how different it was over here?
Well, it was really difficult because I couldn't speak English, so that was a real challenge.
Australians can't either,
so it was really hard. It was really difficult because yes, it was hard to be in Chile, but I had a sense of purpose.
Yes.
So coming here, arriving here, I remember writing a letter to my parents and saying something like, this is beautiful, the place is beautiful, there's lots of parks. And I couldn't tell them how I felt. I couldn't tell them that I felt really alienated and really displaced and really upset because I needed to validate the fact that I had actually jumped on a plane and come to Australia. So it is contradictory. So safety, from a point of view, I'm not going to get killed. Yes, absolutely. But it didn't mean that I felt that I belonged, and it didn't mean that I felt that I had a place, that this was my place, or I had a sense of purpose.
So it obviously cultivated in you. So tell us a bit about that story then. So you obviously grew to love Australia and it became your home. But did you get a lot of support? Were there programs in place to help you learn English, to help you?
Yeah, I did, and I was very determined. I thought, I'm going to master your language.
Quirky language.
So yes, so I was very determined, I really wanted to learn quickly because I couldn't bear the fact that I was so isolated, and so yes, I did, and there was a lot of support then, and English classes, and and all of that, and people, social workers, that were a bit of a conduit, and that was great. Yeah.
So you've come over here and you've gone into the arts straight away. So you've been in that giving mode. Despite all of that oppression, you still felt a desire to give, and to give to a new community that you didn't know very well as well.
Yeah, again, Chris, I'm not sure thanks for your kind thoughts. I'm not sure this comes from that. For me, the work that I've done, and my passion, I suppose, is the concept of social justice, and it's kind of it's not a surprise, because I grew up in a place where there wasn't social justice and there wasn't freedom. So for me, I suppose the idea of freedom is what drives me, and I've seen what the arts can do in terms of expressing that freedom, particularly if you haven't had freedom. And I suppose coming to Australia, and it was great and fantastic. But I felt quite displaced also because I thought, my God, this country is just so wealthy. It's like, where are the poor people live? Where is the poor people live? And I remember going around, and it's like, where are the poor people? There's no poor people. There can be, like there got to be poor people, as in poor, materially poor. I'm talking about. Anyway, so and I was at my English class, and the teacher wrote on the then blackboards. She wrote, "White Australia has a black history." And I thought to myself, that's really interesting. What does it mean? So I looked what this black history meant, and I went, oh my God. So I've been here for a year and a half, and I've never realised, or no one told me that this was Aboriginal land. And that was a real shock, because it was an incongruence. There was a kind of a cultural, incongruence, I suppose. Anyway, so that, I suppose, one thing led to another, and I took a lot of interest in this. Parallel to this process, I was like a feather in the wind, because I didn't have roots. So I thought I needed to somehow try to build some roots, and the way that eventuated was sort of really I did something that probably most people do when we're older, when you start taking an interest in your parents or your culture and your history. It's like when you're in 20, you don't want to know about that. You're too busy doing other things. But maybe in your 40s or 50s, you start going, I want to know who I am, my grandparents or whatever. And so I did that a lot earlier, and I wanted to know where I came from, and that led me to the arts. And I got together, other Chilean women, and we started doing some things about finding out where we came from, and I took an interest in Indigenous history of Chile. This is again because, of course, like most of us, we didn't learn that at school. Not there, not here, right? So that's all over the place. And anyway, so that. Sorry, is that time? Okay, so maybe ask me. Sorry, I'm aware of the time, so maybe.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to finish by saying that the leadership for you and the arts has been such a powerful way for you to help express that leadership.
That's right, yes.
So the final thing I wanted to say is obviously you come through a very traumatic background. That was a huge part of forging for you and who you are. If you could go back and see yourself in that time, in that oppression, what would you say to yourself? What would you give as advice?
I don't know, because if I really thought about it, I probably wouldn't have come.
You
And
would
I don't know. A few years after I came, I thought that I had made the wrong decision. I'm not saying that I did, by the way. I'm really happy and things turned out well, and I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me because it's been an incredible opportunity. So I don't know. It's just a very difficult. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. Okay. What would I say?
I'll give you a simpler one then. For you, if you had to put that one line of what leadership is for you, what would you say in a sentence you think leadership is?
Yeah, okay. I think we really need a different kind of leadership, particularly now. I think the leadership that we need is a female-driven leadership, with all the respect to the blokes. I really believe that there's a time, and I'm not talking about men not having those feminine qualities, by the way. We have a time now where we need nurturing leadership and leadership based on collaboration. The command and control leadership time, it's over. So really, we need to change and shift the paradigm, and where diversity is really critical for that too. We can't continue to have our conversations where like talks to like and continue to reproduce the patterns of leadership that we've had to now, because we can see what's happening in the planet, not just here, all over the world. And Australia is incredibly privileged, right? We know the level of poverty. And I'm glad that you, Brad, are quite, optimistic. When I think about, I'm trying to be optimistic, but when I think what's happening not just in Australia and the rest of the world, it's harder to be optimistic. Our happiness depends on someone else's happiness too. Our wealth, it depends on what's happening in other parts of the world. So anyway, I'm asking people to reflect on a different kind of leadership that is much more, that we understand that we're an ecosystem. So, we can't just, look after our little patch anymore. Yeah.
Wonderful. And that's what this is all about, is trying to put those out towards everyone out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.